Right now, for unclear and often contradictory reasons, America and Israel are unleashing destruction, devastating lives across the Middle East.
You could say we did it out of habit, which is not a good thing to do.
Get such massive oil reserves in Iran out of the hands of terrorists.
These latest conflicts are cutting too many lives tragically short and uprooting even more. The fallout has rapidly spread across the region and the consequences are being felt across the globe. And amidst all of the destruction and chaos that's been unleashed, the world is finally starting to question its fossil fuel habit and looking for a way forward that could be more secure, peaceful, and powerful for the entire planet. I'm Adam, I have a PhD in atmospheric physics, and I'm here to help you make sense of the changing planet that we all share. Today I want to discuss whether Trump is in fact a climate action champion. Now, the short answer is obviously not, but the longer answer is just maybe. Accidentally. Now, I've spoken a bunch on this channel about how climate change and conflict aren't separate threats. They're deeply interwoven. On the one hand, militaries and armed conflict drive climate change. Analysis from the Conflict and Environment Agency reveals that the total emissions from the world's militaries stand at around 5.5% of the global figure. That's a chunk higher than all the emissions from flying, and enough that if all the militaries were one single nation, that nation would be the world's fourth biggest emitter. That nation would also be terrifying. The thing causing climate change is also a common motivation for conflict. There has, of course, long been speculation that multiple wars have been motivated by securing fossil fuels. Now, well, there's not that much need to speculate. Trump isn't exactly famous for keeping his cards close to his chest. His comments have made clear that oil lies at the dark heart of the recent assaults.
We're going to have our United States oil companies go in and start making money for the country.
And, of course, burning those fossil fuels and dismantling climate action, as Trump is working tirelessly to do, means more greenhouse gases emitted, more temperature rise, and more lives lost to environmental destruction. In a brutal, vicious cycle, these changes to our climate could exacerbate violent conflict. Scarcer resources, including food and water, and rising environmental disasters, from heat waves to rising seas, could raise the threat of war in many parts of the world. Military devastation also means massive environmental damage. We're seeing that right now in Iran. Strikes on oil depots, gas fields, and refineries have seen vast smoke plumes rising across the region, blocking out the sun and causing black rain. This isn't just terrible for our climate. Breathing highly polluted air like this causes devastating health damages, especially for the most vulnerable people. Simultaneously, the diverse but fragile ecosystem of the Persian Gulf is being threatened by everything from bombing to oil spills. But there's another impact that this conflict has. It's a reminder of how fragile our fossil fuel dependent economies are. The whims of just a few men like Trump, Netanyahu, and Putin, can disrupt the entire world. Now, it has to be emphasized, the impacts to the rest of the world are nothing compared to the impacts on the people in the region who are under fire, not just in Iran, but also in Lebanon and Palestine, as well as in the many other countries in the region being caught up in the fallout or in retaliatory strikes. But the shockwaves of these conflicts aren't confined, they're spreading to the rest of the world. As oil and fossil gas tankers have been blocked from traveling the Strait of Hormuz, prices of these fuels are skyrocketing. This isn't just an inconvenience. For millions around the world already desperately struggling to get by, price surges like these can have immense consequences. Like in India, where 90% of imported gas was previously traveling the Strait of Hormuz. Short supply of gas is leaving families hungry and workers without wages. As one 43-year-old tile manufacturer explained, without work, we can't survive. How will we eat? Making matters even worse, there's the threat that the fuel crisis could be followed by a food crisis as the disruption spreads to fertilizer supplies. And there's even talk that the price of prescription medications could be set to spike. Now, anyone working on climate change as long as I have, 15 years at this point, will have heard countless exhausting times that we can't just switch to renewables because they're too unreliable and too expensive. Well, in reality, green tech has become staggeringly cheap, and the technology to store that energy has improved beyond what we could have imagined when I started my climate career. More on all that in a moment. But despite that progress, conservative talking heads and politicians continue to argue that getting to net zero would just be economically unfeasible. Now, this argument doesn't hold up at all because it fails to take into account the costs of not doing anything and then having a whole bunch of climate change to deal with. It's like saying that brakes are too expensive for a car. But now, the staggering cost and chaos of fossil fuels are making renewables look increasingly like a no-brainer, even if you ignore climate breakdown. And there's a deep, dark irony to all of this. After all, Trump himself has long pushed the line that renewables can't be trusted.
The wind doesn't blow. Those big windmills are so pathetic and so bad.
Trump himself has warned countries against fighting climate change.
If you don't get away from this green scam, your country is going to fail.
And Trump himself is pushing these fossil fuel conflicts.
The United States seized 1.9 million barrels of oil.
We're going to keep it.
But the consequence of these conflicts is that Trump himself is revealing to the world that it is in fact fossil fuels that are catastrophically insecure and expensive. Trump inadvertently and with immense destruction has made one of the most compelling cases for the energy transition that we've ever seen. So this is all serving as a devastating reminder that an economy and energy system built on fossil fuels is a system built on shaky ground. Not that we needed much of a reminder. Russia's invasion of Ukraine began in 2022 and is continuing to this day. It's estimated that the war has cost over 500,000 lives. And as the crisis unfolded, it rapidly raised the cost of fuel and food alike, pushing tens of millions around the world into poverty in just a few months. Side note, but tragically, the US and Israeli assault on Iran plays right into Putin's hands. Russia is a major exporter of fossil fuels, and now that prices are surging and supply is limited, the world is buying more Russian oil for higher prices, helping to prop up the struggling Russian economy. It really is wild just how connected all these crises are. So we already knew just how fragile fossil fuels could be, but the war with Iran is strengthening that case. In comparison with coal, oil, and gas, once renewables are built, and built with energy storage, they're secure. A country knows that they can rely on that energy without wondering whether ships carrying fuel are going to get attacked, or the countries providing those ships are going to start an invasion or be invaded themselves. And then there's the question of cost. Plummeting solar and wind prices mean that the energy transition is no longer just a question of climate change or of energy security. It makes economic sense too. Even last year, before the war in Iran started, 90% of new renewables worldwide produced electricity for less than the cheapest fossil fuel alternative. Now, I just know that commenters are gearing up to climate-splain to me that you can't compare like for like because wind and solar aren't always on. But here's the thing, storing energy from renewables has also become way more affordable. That's one major difference between today's situation and where the world was when Russia invaded Ukraine. Batteries now cost half what they did back then, just 4 years ago. Getting power from a battery that can run at full power for 4 hours, imaginatively called a 4-hour battery, is cheaper in many countries than getting power by burning fossil gas. The Climate Change Committee in the UK estimates that getting to net zero would cost around £100 billion. Now that seems like a huge number, at least until you start to compare it to the alternatives. £100 billion is roughly the amount that the UK has spent on energy costs due to the shocks following the Ukraine war. So it suddenly starts to sound like a much better deal. The United Nations climate chief has pointed out that in the context of this new war, relying on fossil fuels threatens national security and energy bills. As he pretty brutally put it, those risks are abundantly clear right now and are burning at everyone's feet. And others outside of climate organizations are also sounding the alarm. Microsoft's energy chief has said the war strengthens the case for clean energy, and former US intelligence official Tom Ellison explained, fossil fuels have to constantly flow or else all hell breaks loose. That's just a fundamental vulnerability that fossil fuels have compared to renewable energy. I cannot stress enough how much of a sea change it is to hear non-climate people talking about how vulnerable fossil fuels are compared to renewables. Honestly, I never thought I'd see the day. But here we are with renewables so cheap and abundant, and the flow of fossil fuels so aggressively throttled that the world is finally reassessing its addiction to coal, oil, and gas. Now, this isn't just about words. Having already experienced the major energy shock of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, countries and consumers around the world have been responding and preparing. As fuel becomes more expensive, gas-guzzling vehicles make less and less sense. So electric vehicle sales are through the roof. Globally, battery-powered vehicles are already cutting oil demand by over 2 million barrels every single day, a stat that's projected to double in just the next 4 years. In China, for example, half of all cars now sold are electric, helping protect their drivers from skyrocketing fuel prices. China's also been building renewables at such a rate that the country's emissions have been flat or falling for 21 months, even as electricity demand grows. A massive deal for today's biggest emitter. And investment in renewables is paying off. Take Vietnam, which gets about 1/8 of its power from solar and wind. Given skyrocketing fossil fuel costs, the country could save $600 million thanks to this renewable infrastructure. Oh, and speaking of cash, I don't make any money with product placements or ads because I don't want to sell you all stuff that you don't need. If you're into that, you can become a patron up here to keep the channel alive. And if that's not for you, you can still be an amazing climate by clicking subscribe, and giving the video a like and a comment helps it reach even more people too. Now, not everyone is committed to the energy transition. Countries everywhere from Latin America to Africa have been at a crossroads, debating building more fossil fuel infrastructure versus investing in renewables. And now the world's facing another fossil fuel crisis. Well, that question just became a whole lot easier to answer. As one energy analyst put it, once you've got your solar panel, there's no cost for the sun. But once you've got your gas-fired power station, you have to pay every day for the gas that you burn in it. We're also seeing that renewable energy makes a profound difference for the countries that find themselves under assault. As the war wages on, Ukraine is turning to renewable energy to keep the lights on. That's partly because of its price, and partly because renewables are more spread out. That means Russian forces can't disrupt and destroy them anywhere near as easily as they can conventional power plants. Now, the truth is that when it comes to climate change, the world's made nowhere near enough progress. We're passing the pivotal 1.5 degree limit, and global emissions still aren't on their way down. But it's so easy to forget that not enough progress isn't the same thing as no progress. Clean energy is being built on absolutely bonkers scales. Renewables now provide the world with more electricity than coal, fulfilling all the extra demand as electricity needs grow. Combined, renewables with batteries now make economic sense across the globe, and emissions are finally flatlining. The question is whether yet another energy crisis causing conflict could be the final nail in the fossil fuel coffin. Now, not everyone everywhere is convinced that this war is making the case to quit fossil fuels. Some European nations, for example, are arguing to actually weaken climate regulations to provide short-term cost savings. But of course, this would do nothing to address the root cause of the problem, that relying on fossil fuels has become extremely expensive and insecure, and, is causing devastating climate change. But still, right-wing voices in the UK are calling for more licenses to dig up fossil fuels. That might sound sensible, but it wouldn't actually lower energy prices for the country, since the fossil gas that's dug up is sold on the international market at the internationally determined price. Now, disclaimer, I hope it's clear that this video is not an endorsement of war. War horrifies me, and I deeply believe that the damage and devastation of conflict should be avoided at all costs. And the fact that recent conflicts may be pushing the world to take the energy transition more seriously, well, that's not an argument that these wars are good. I mean, we should have been taking the energy transition seriously all this time. Because of that climate change thing. And being opposed to war does not mean that I'm a supporter of the regime in Iran. I think we can do better than thinking that the enemy of our enemy is our friend. I just don't see how a conflict like this can achieve anything other than spread more suffering and pain and hate. It certainly doesn't seem to carve a path towards peace and safety for anyone in the region or in the world. I also want to point out that we can think beyond an every country for themselves energy approach. Founding director of End Climate Silence, Genevieve Gunter, argues that national security and energy independence probably oughtn't be our core goals. After all, we can aim to build a world where we work together and support each other across borders. Oh my gosh, this is already such a long and heavy video. And so if you take one single thing away from it, it has to be this. So many of the issues that the world is facing are deeply interconnected, from climate change to violent conflict to our health. But that means the solutions are also interconnected. And if approached correctly, fighting climate change can mean resisting wars, and pursuing peace can mean a safer planet for everyone. Now, I mentioned the immense climate damages of wars, and, well, I made a video looking at just how bad it can be. Okay, stay safe out there. Until next time. Bye. Oh my god, I feel like I haven't breathed in half an hour.